Hey everybody. Okay, so yesterday was wild. Um, Between getting the rejection that just floored me, my younger daughter finally got over her cold. Today is her birthday, so like, thank God. But of course, last night in the middle of the night, my older daughter, who is not a champion puker, she's a panic puker. So now she's sick. So like, when it rains, it pours. Oh my goodness sakes. Um, anyway, so skipping ahead, I've gone over in not I don't know if any of these videos, but I've gone over a couple of times how I do job search filtering and that kind of thing. I might make another video for the next job that I find, but I had a friend of mine who, when I was talking to her about, places you'd recommend that aren't necessarily startups, because if you know me at all, you know that startups are kind of my area, my love language. But startup growth and development right now is limited. We don't have a lot of venture capital coming in. People are scared about launching businesses or growing businesses right now with everything the way it is at the federal level, at the state level a little bit if you're in certain states in particular. But anyway, Ellevation has been one that I've had an eye on for a long time. Just kind of, I find the stuff that they do if in the work that they do very interesting, and they seem to be somebody who is highly regarded by past employees, current employees, prospective employees. So it hasn't always occurred to me, or hadn't quite occurred to me, to apply at positions with them. But I figure at this point, it's not a bad thing to probably be diversifying a little bit. I still haven't quite stepped outside of ed tech to apply yet. I don't know if it's a combination of like trepidation that I'm gonna be back to square one in terms of like when I started out in ed tech and people being like, "Oh, you have no experience," blah blah blah, which I'm told by many people is not the case, though I still have a little bit of anxiety that comes with that. And I think a lot of it comes from like the giving up on education part of education has been my life for my entire adult life for sure. And so it's difficult to think about leaving that space. So I think I'll probably keep applying for ed tech stuff, and if eventually the stars align and that's not the way that I need to be going, then a job is a job is a job. I've got to have one. So if it's not in ed tech, it's not in ed tech. But I'm gonna keep pursuing that avenue for as long as I'm able. Anyway, so I've already applied for a dozen or so jobs at this point, but I wanted to go back for one that's a job with a little bit more of an established company. Some of the job descriptions for startup companies, really small companies, are a little bit more difficult to navigate than established companies. They typically know what they're looking for. They've hired enough product managers at this point that I'm sure they've got it relatively dialed in as to what it is that you're doing. I do know that sometimes whatever you're applying for in writing is not exactly what it turns out to be, and I'm fine with that. But place like Ellevation is likely to have their job descriptions pretty tight. So I've already gone through this job description multiple times. It's how I know I'm going to apply for it. But one of the things that I've talked, dozens, if not hundreds of people at this point, the evidence the evidence for applying, or some of the data surrounding applying for jobs, uh, we already know that women and people of color apply for jobs at a less frequent rate when they don't feel like they hit 100% of the requirements. So, and in fact, don't apply hardly at all for jobs they don't feel like they have 100% requirements met. So, one of the things that I wanted to run through was how I gauge whether or not I'm a good fit from, recognizing that they're just going to see a resume. Am I going to be able to put the things on here that show I can do those things, even if it's just an analogous experience somewhere else? So I've already read through, but so looking at the About Me section, About You section. So Elevate in this case only has one kind of number requirement here. Everything else is kind of, can you do this? Can you do that? Do you have experience doing this? Mm. Guys, I'm sorry. I feel like every time I record a video, I just like I don't know, yawn. I've had this problem in podcasts too, where it's like all of a sudden I just start yawning. Anyway, but so 2 to 4 years of relevant experience, including ideally 2 of direct product management experience. Check. I'm all good there. The rest of these are a little bit more kind of soft skill or human centric skill rather than like a technical feeling skill. So, do I have experience working with products at the intersection of content and technology? Yep, worked in ed tech. It doesn't get much more intersection of content and technology. Strong orientation to user experience, front end application design. Yep, check. I've designed front end application UIs, and I've got an actual job title, director of user experience in my past that'll hit that at least so they can see that. Experience helping to build cohesive teams and cultures. Yep. I have to tell you, the first time that I read the rituals piece, I laughed. I laughed out loud. Um, I've not heard it called rituals much, if ever, but it made me think immediately. My 2 littles will occasionally play camping, and they'll set up a little like whatever candle, kind of, one of those battery candles, and they'll have all their stuffed animals sitting around, and it looks like a seance. And so all I can think about is these team cultures is all these Ellevation folks in like blue, yellow, or blue, orange, and green, like what are those called, the blankets, like the full blankets that fit over you, look like some kind of underground society in their Ellevation colored robes or whatever. Anyway, it cracked me up. It was a good visual. Thank goodness I'm not applying for a marketing role, because that would probably be the angle I would throw in. Like learning English doesn't have to be, or uh, second language acquisition doesn't have to be difficult. Join our cult. I just laughed. Anyway, so I've led a ton of people, a ton of teams, as many as 20 or more at a time. I would hope that people who I've worked with or supported as a direct supervisor in the past will have thought that I've built cohesive team cultures. That is one of the things that I feel really strongly about. Anybody who's worked with me, I'm hoping, would tell you that my team comes first, above all else. Strong interest in the K-12 space. Yep, can't get rid of me yet. Strong track record of working cross-functionally. Yep, Startup Landy is all about working cross-functionally. And then also what they mentioned here about managing trade-offs. A lot of the compromise piece. So one of the things that, not just as a product manager, but as anybody in a ed tech company will tell you, and probably any company, very few times when you have an idea are you not somehow compromising with other people's ideas, or feathering them together or whatever else. So as long as you can manage those trade-offs and recognize what your priorities are versus something that you can use as a bargaining chip, you're in pretty good shape. Okay. Highly accountable for my work. Yep. I work independently most of the time. I've worked remote for years. I have yet to have anybody tell me that I have an issue with that. Experimental and curious. I mean, with food, but and sometimes art projects every once in a while. But yeah, so being able to show that I've tested ideas, that I am quick to move on from a failure, that kind of thing. I don't always love that fail fast wording, but really more the idea that if you fail, you can pick yourself up, dust off, and move on really quickly, and learn from that failure, make some meaningful connections for yourself to improve whatever the next thing is. Demonstrating an eagerness to learn from others. Yep, that I would say, in a as humble a way as I can, that's probably one of the biggest things that I bring to the table, but also that a lot of other people bring to the table. So I'm not gonna like stand out from somebody that is also eager to learn, but I'm a quick learner, and I'm pretty good at prioritizing as well as solutioning. That's that's a consistent theme. My dad used to say when we were little that your ticket, your admission ticket to sit at the table and bring your problems is bought with the solution you also bring. So even when our solution wasn't great, actionable, whatever, was a little nonsensical, as long as we had at least some idea how to try to solve it, or some idea that we might try, we were that was okay. But coming to him with a problem without any idea what to do was always met with. And anyway, so yeah, there you go. Travel expectations. I will say this is something that I think a lot of folks don't take as seriously as they should sometimes. When somebody says the travel expectations are blah, a lot of times you'll find they're not exactly that. So, like, even though it says 10 times per year, it might be closer to 5. It also might be closer to 15. So, when I look at things that have like a 20% travel, one of the questions that I'll ask in some of those initial screening interviews or whatever is just, are does that feel pretty close based on the travel expectations of people in similar roles? And it's pretty easy to ferret out, like, well, we put 20% on there because we think you might travel, but nobody's had to travel yet. Or, well, that is pretty low because most of the people we have traveling at 30%, whatever it is. Which, for a lot of the people that I talk to, especially my transitioning teacher folks, that's sometimes can be really challenging. Like my littles are 5, just turning 5 today, and then 6.5. And so they're old enough now where I can start being away once a month for a couple of days and it's not too bad. But if I needed to be gone half a month at a time, that might be really troublesome, or problematic. So just something to be thinking about. We sometimes skip over that, or I've noticed that people sometimes skip over that travel requirements without maybe taking it as seriously as they should. Anyway, so I've already built my resume to go with it. Here we go. So I want to walk through real quick what I've done with my resume that's a little bit different. So I'm gonna try something that I haven't done before. The worst thing that happens is I don't get a call back, I suppose, and Ellevation is very difficult to get into, so it'll be hard to tell if it was poor formatting, whatever else, unconventional design, or if it was because they have 1,000 people applying for this role because people want to work there. Anyway, but so what I've done with my resume this time, I'm actually including my letter of interest, my cover letter, here at the beginning, and I'm using shout out to Aaron Luber. I'm trying to move toward a more highlight centric cover letter that explains a bit more about my relevant experience versus just what my resume will do. One of the big things that Aaron talks about consistently, besides the fact that you need a concise cover letter, is that, here, let me make it full screen, is that it needs to be concise and that it needs to be like quick, readable, move along, and it's got to make those connections for people so that they don't have to figure out how this experience is similar to this experience. That's some mental gymnastics that a lot of folks in who are doing screening, if you're in the recruiting space or the talent acquisition space, uh, those folks aren't experts in those roles. They haven't necessarily been in any of these roles. They don't necessarily have a deep dive into it. So the last thing I want to do is hope that somebody can connect these two experiences that feel very disparate but that actually have a common thread. So I'm doing that for people. I've done that in the past in paragraph format, but I'm moving toward this bulleted format I'm just gonna try it and I'm gonna see how I like it. It's still probably too bulky. We'll I'm gonna I'm gonna send Erin the video afterwards, and we'll see what she thinks. But we'll see. We'll see if it ends up being too bulky. It may be. I've pulled out 5 of the things that feel like the most critical, or they're mentioned multiple times in the job description, so on, whatever. I've added those 5 in here, and I may need to bring it back down to 3 or something like that. But I had enough stuff in here that I felt like I was missing some of the context if I didn't. Anyway, so then I've also, this is another thing that I'm doing that's a little bit different. I'm also going to put my references here at the bottom with their information, as opposed to I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I don't know that I've been asked for references much, if ever, and I feel like that's a disservice. It's a disservice to a lot of folks, but it feels like a disservice to candidates that, like, I've got people who can speak to my skills in these explicit areas. I'd really like for those people to be available to be contacted if they have any questions or want to know about my working style. So I figure it doesn't hurt to have these people on here. If I'm sure that the internet will have thoughts on what I should be doing with this. I'll leave it up to that, because that's definitely what a job seeker needs, is the voice of the internet. But anyway, so moving on from that, I've tightened down my resume. I think probably everybody at this point knows I have a 2-page resume. I've tried many times to pull it down to one. I don't know that I necessarily believe that having one is the end of the world. What I do know, and again, this is another callback to Erin's work, uh, that I want to make sure that if I fold this paper in half, in thirds, whatever, that anything above like the halfway mark on the first is compelling and people will want to read it. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm trying to do. That about me section, I'm not a big fan of a lot of the paragraphs I read for about me's, mostly just because it reads like a dating summary, whatever. And a lot of times it seems like it's very formulaic, whatever. So I've tried to be a little bit more specific, especially when it's a role that I think I'd be a really good fit for. So like this one, I've augmented a little bit to be really specific for the assessment product manager role. If I was applying for a general product manager role somewhere else in a, maybe it's a role that's interesting, but I'm not super excited about, I might kind of put a generic one in here and let it roll. And I've pulled down my resume experiences to a couple of bullets for each, max 4. And that's been a struggle too, because there's, again, startup landia, you're working across a bunch of different things, and so it's hard to narrow it down. But narrowing it down based on what the job was looking for wasn't too bad. Anyway, the other thing, and I think I've talked to a bunch of people about this already. I think we've talked about this in other videos too, or in previous blog posts, but the technical skills piece, one of the big things that I noticed, especially about a year ago, or a little more than that maybe, there were a lot of folks with a skills section at the top of their resume, and the skills section was all like unknowable things about them, like excellent communicator. So it wasn't quantifiable. It wasn't something that you could prove. I get, like, it's nothing you can prove. So, or you demonstrate expertise in right in the moment. So one of the things that I've tried to get away from on my resume is having fluff kind of things like LMS, Google Suite, uh, product management as literally just a bullet, that kind of stuff. Instead, what I try to have are the actual products, softwares, platforms, whatever, that if somebody in an interview popped it up in front of me and said, hey, I want you to walk through how to create an invoice using NetSuite. Sure. I mean, might take me a couple of minutes to remember, but I've used the platform. I know how to do that kind of stuff. Or, Google Analytics. Let me pulled up the Google Analytics site, or the Google Analytics for the Ellevation website, for example. I could at least make sense of the numbers. I've done that in the past. Kind of a crash course in marketing, that kind of stuff. So anyway, but so these are things that I want to have somebody be able to actually recognize. Yeah, in fact, I can use these programs, which should extrapolate into having these skills. Anyway, and then my second page, I try to keep the most. I have my resume set up as a time-bound resume, so it's some people will set it up so that all of their most relevant experiences are up at the top, which I think can be really good for some folks, especially folks who've got kind of an eclectic background or maybe experts in a variety of fields and they bounce back and forth between them. But as somebody who's done hiring, a non-linear resume just kind of makes my brain hurt, and I often, don't laugh, will seriously print somebody's resume out and like cut it and move it around because I want to know where you've been most recently. Because if, like, for example, I was a teacher 5 years ago, So there are some things now going on in the teaching world that I never experienced, or that it's been a while, it's been long enough that maybe I don't have the most accurate memory of all of that kind of stuff. So I kind of like to see that, and I want people to also see the progression, so that it's not, doesn't just feel like I dropped into some of these roles, like I have done these things ahead, before and built up to it. So anyway, that was another kind of another piece that I try to keep these pieces from long enough ago that are supplemental. They help, they show growth, but they're not necessarily the heavy hitters unless I'm applying for something like a customer success manager, I suppose. But these experiences, these at the top here, are the ones that I've done the most growing professionally and personally in. Anyway, I also have sections, and this will be something else that I think people will have strong feelings about. But I've got my education and my certifications here. I used to not include my education because if if you have a background in teaching, you likely have a bachelor's, though that isn't true anymore, and that's another reason that I've added it in. But I also wanted people to be able to see that I've been through not just my bachelor's and my credential, but also my master's, and then some other things that I'm either working on or have done in the past. These I think are all pretty standard. It's probably not going to shock anybody. The pieces that I've added recently, one I'm torn on and one I think is fine. The professional associations piece I think is just kind of interesting. It gives somebody a flavor for who I am in terms of my community service orientation, or just kind of my general interest in serving the people around me. And then this is the one I'm always stuck on. So I get people all the time who are like, "Yes, you've done so much work. Put that on there." And then I get other people who are like, "If you're not going for a social media job, or you're not going for a content creator job, who cares?" I don't know. I figure at this point, if I've got the tiny amount of space that it requires, what do I care? I would certainly hope that I'm not hired as a result of these things, especially if it's a role that wouldn't actually need these skills. But I do appreciate that it helps show that outside of work, I'm still doing things to help serve that broader community, in this case, primarily the transitioning teacher audience. So anyway, I'll be interested to see if anybody has any thoughts on that. But so anyway, so that is a brief run through of the resume that I created. And I'm sure there's going to be questions about, did you use AI? Yeah, of course I did. I used AI to help me dissect the job description. What were some of the things that felt like were most highlighted? I had it brainstorm with me what were some things in my past that I don't have on my resume necessarily that might be good to mention. Um, Different angles. I had it also look at some of the folks in similar positions, their or their LinkedIn pages, and what are some things that we notice about their history, that kind of thing. So it gave me a good foundation for being able to write both the letter of interest and pare down my resume to make sure that it was made sense, that I wasn't just adding a bunch of fluff in that I feel is important, but actually nobody reading it was going to care about when it comes to this particular job. Anyway, so that's that. Then I'm going to move over to the actual. Oh, where are you? Let me move over to my actual job application, which is over here. Sorry about that. Anyway, so I've already applied. I used my LinkedIn profile. I added my resume. I've got my name in here. I did all the things I was supposed to do. Then I also did included my LinkedIn and my portfolio, obviously, whatever. But then I also included my cover letter, and I answered the question here. I also get a lot of questions about cover letters. Would you write a cover letter? Would you not write a cover letter? I I have conflicting thoughts on it, but if it's a job I'm interested in, and they ask for a cover letter, I will typically create a cover letter to go with it. I'm not writing, a novel. It's going to be very quick. I'm going to keep that bulleted layout because that was really easy to be able to go through and fill in that stuff. I maybe wouldn't have answered this question if I didn't, again, really think this was an interesting role. because I've done that in my cover letter already. I've already explained more or less why I'm interested in working for the company, specifically in that role. But so I took a more of a like, why would I care about being with this company in particular role or approach with this section, and then, so on and so forth. In this box, I'm not going to add anything because, again, between this paragraph, my resume, and my cover letter, if there's anything else I want to share, it's flown out of my brain. I'll get a chance to do that when we, if I get chosen to interview. So, anyway, that was the strategy for this role. I'll be interested to see what you think.